Peace and love, Moors. What's popping with you? It's your brother Judah Son. Hope all is well with everybody. As you can see, I know pretty much a lot of you Moors are already familiar with what we're looking at here on the screen right now, which is one of the many Moorish proclamations that have been put out. And the reason why I want to do this particular video is because I don't think that many of us out there as Moors, I don't think we grasp the power of these proclamations, or I don't think we grasp the power that these proclamations say that we have, and we're not grasping that. And what happens is we're allowing news media propaganda of pale-skinned European nations, and this is not to be racist. This is what it is. This is my website. Let's put it out there, tv.com. This is mine. But it is not to be racist, but it is what it is. These pale-skinned European nation media outlets are publishing propaganda that is demonizing Moors, making Moors look like the infamous sovereign citizen, the anti-government extremist hate group. And by them utilizing those tools to demonize us in that fashion, which is much the same way that, you know, Hitler demonized the Jewish people, it causes a lot of us who aren't as well as studied, a lot of us who may not have, the wherewithal within, mentally, spiritually. I guess I'm trying to say that, I guess those of us who are Moors who aren't as brave, right? It's causing us to abandon our birthrights, and still operate as Negroes, still operate as European Christian property, and not be ourselves, not utilize our own things. So they are demonizing us because when so-called black people disappear, and I mean not physically, but disappear on black and white, because that is the only place that they exist, unless you're going to go into the Anglo-Saxon definition of the word, which means pale, then we know who the actual black people are. But when those so-called black people disappear from black and white, there are going to be some people who are not going to be able to benefit anymore off of those commercial brand names that have attachments to certain things in the world of commerce. So they have some of us scared out there. They have some of us so scared out there that we'll jump on these European media outlets and we'll disrespect one another and call each other our brother and sister sovereign citizens and anti-government and extremists and even hate groups by our own. And that is the point of this European media that is being put out, this colonists media that is being put out, no matter whether it's the Southern Poverty Law Center, no matter whether it's the Chronicle Telegram of Elyria, Ohio, or the Morning Journal of Lorain, Ohio, or any other European Christian white male power structure media outlet out there that is being used as a tool, a weapon of mass destruction to murder the image of the Moors, who are now commercially, fraudulently, and colorably branded as Negro, Black, Colored, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Dominican. I could keep going on. See, they're scared, so they have to use those tools and fill them up with vitriol and tricky words to make you abandon your birthright, and you shouldn't do that. So again, what we're focusing on right here is one of the many Moorish proclamations that were put out, and we're just going to read. These proclamations were put out on the public record by elected officials, public officials, members of certain bodies of governmental, what is alleged to be governmental organizations, right? So let's see what they have to say about the Moors. Just briefly, we're going to go into this briefly. It says here, Office of the Mayor, City of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, Mayor, proclamation. So give me a moment here. Let's do this correctly. Let's go into the etymology of proclamations. Let's do that. So I guess we'll have to go to proclaim. It says Middle English. Look at that. Proclame, which comes from the Latin proclamare, which means to cry out, right? Clamare, shout. See, claim, of which the word was assimilated, okay, of which the word was assimilated. So proclamation, right? Proclamation, it says see, claim. So this is etymology. Let's go to claim. They say, it says verb of claim, tonic stem of clamer, cry, call, appeal, clamere, cry, call, proclaim, related to clarus, which is to clear up. So a proclamation is to cry out, to shout, to claim, to call, to clear up. All right? That's what a proclamation is. Okay, so now what we want to do is we're going to go into a law dictionary here. And this is not a Black's Law dictionary, but this should be general and to the point. So let's look at proclamation. Here we go. Proclamation, evidence, the act of causing some state matters to be published or made generally known. A written or printed document in which are contained such matters issued by proper authority, as the president's proclamation, the governor's, the mayor's proclamation. The word proclamation is also used to express the public nomination made of anyone to a high office. As such, a prince was proclaimed emperor. You got to pay attention to that. The word proclamation is also used to express the public nomination made of anyone to a high office. As such, a prince was proclaimed emperor. The president's proclamation has not the force of law unless when authorized by Congress, as if Congress were to pass an act which would take effect upon the happening of a contingent event which was to be declared by the president by proclamation to have happened. In this case, the proclamation would give the act the force of law, which till then it wanted. B, this also says practice, the declaration made by crier by authority of the court, and a mayor is an officer of the court, which hence mayor's court, that something is about to be done. It usually commences with the French word oyez, do you hear, in order to attract attention. It is particularly used on the meeting or opening of a court and its adjournment. It is also frequently employed to discharge persons who have been accused of crimes or misdemeanors. Now, this is deep. This is deep. This is deep. Proclamation is a very deep word, but even still, it's to cry out, it's to claim, it's to put on the public record. It's an act, let me go back. It's evidence, the act of causing some state matters to be published or generally known. All right. So now, with that being known, what we've gone in thus far with proclamation and proclaiming, let's move forward. Y'all bear with me. Y'all bear with me here because I have this app that's on that's causing this to, I didn't have the volume turned down. Okay. So, Office of the Mayor, City of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, Mayor, proclamation. Check this out. Whereas the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, Hammatites, and Canaanites, who were permitted by the old pharaohs of Kemet to traverse from East Africa and later formed themselves kingdoms extending from the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa, the Atlantic islands, onto the present-day continental Americas, and whereas the indigenous Moorish peoples of the Americas are now united in order to again link themselves with the family of nations, and whereas the Moorish Americans, being aboriginal to the territories of North, Central, and South Americas, have formed a sovereign theocratic government guided by the command principles of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice through virtue of the universal right to self-determination, as well as the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples guaranteed in the Charter. And I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to stop right there. For a split second, I want you guys to absorb this. I want you guys to absorb this right here. And we should be bringing that up on the screen right now and zoning that in. I want you guys to absorb that for a little bit. And I'm just going to sit back. Read that proclamation, those top 3 portions of that. Let's read it again together. Whereas the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, Hammatites, and Canaanites who were permitted by the old pharaohs of Kemet to traverse from East Africa and later formed themselves kingdoms extending from the northern and southern shores of Africa. The northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa, the Atlantic islands, onto the present-day continental Americas. Now check this out. It says the Moorish Americans are the descendants of the ancient Moabites, Hammatites, and Canaanites. For all the Israelites out there, you might not like this, but it includes you. Check this out. Who were permitted by the old pharaohs of Kemet, right, to traverse from East Africa. Let me get back up here. To traverse from East Africa and later formed themselves kingdoms extending from northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa, the Atlantic islands, onto the present-day continental Americas. So that's saying these ancient people from Africa, these so-called Africans, these prehistoric Africans, different nations from the continent within the continents from continent Africa, right, got permission from the pharaohs of Kemet, which is so-called Egypt, to traverse from East Africa, right, and later formed kingdoms extending from the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa to the Atlantic islands, or to the present-day continental Americas. What are the Atlantic islands? I don't have a map. I should have some. So maybe what like Cuba, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Haiti, Dominican Republic. That's all in the Atlantic. That's all on the Atlantic side, right? These are all islands in the Atlantic, right? So they formed themselves kingdoms from the northwestern and southwestern shores of Africa, Moors, to the Atlantic islands, onto the present-day continental Americas. And whereas these are indigenous Moorish peoples of the Americas, now united, not separatists, united in order to again link themselves with the family of nations, right? And whereas the Moorish Americans, being aboriginal. Now let's stop. Let's see if we could, let's look up aboriginal real fast, because I want to make sure that you get this. Aboriginal. Okay, so aboriginal comes from aborigine or aborigine, right? and it is a Latin word, aborigines, or I guess if you took Latin and went to Spanish, it might be aborigenes. Abori people. Let me start. Okay, it says the first inhabitants. Usually, ab origin, from the beginning. See origin, but perhaps a proper name alternate by popular. Hence aboriginal. So the first inhabitants of Latium and Italy. That's an example they're giving you. So when they're saying the Moorish Americans are aboriginal, indigenous to the Americas, they're saying the first inhabitants. And since we have been the first inhabitants, that now makes the descendants indigenous. What does indigenous mean? Born. Let's go back to indigenous again. This is the Oxford's dictionary. I'm sorry. Indigena, native, right? And strengthened from gene, base of gignere, to beget. Let's look up beget. It says to beget. Beget, begotten son, beget, begotten son, beget. It says beget, begot, begat, begotten, acquired. It means to procreate. So not only were our ancestors the first inhabitants of the Americas, they were the first to procreate, thus us. So let me make this clear. Not all of us came here on slave ships. I want to make that clear. These are so-called Asiatic African nations right here from Africa, who were the first inhabitants of the Americas, the first to procreate on the Americas and to produce seed, children, kingdoms. That is sovereignty. That is sovereignty. That is sovereignty. Do you hear me? Somebody is playing. Somebody is playing. Right? It says Moorish Americans being aboriginal to the territories of North, Central, and South Americas have formed a sovereign theocratic government. Let's look that up. They ain't got it in this dictionary. But we got it right here. So what we are looking up again is theocratic, right? We're looking up theocratic. I apologize. I don't know if y'all can hear me properly. Theocracy. Here we go. So we have theocracy. It comes from the Greek theos, which is God, plus kratein, which means to rule. Government by priests claiming to rule with divine authority. There goes that claim again. A country so governed. Theocrat. So that's a total different government than theocracy, than democracy. All right, that's a total different theocracy. So here we have elected officials who are so-called citizens of the United States or United States citizens, right? Who are elected, so-called elected officials of so-called government bodies, putting out publications saying that these people who are calling themselves because let me tell you, Moorish Americans aren't the Moroccans over there. You don't see Moroccans over here calling themselves Moorish Americans. It's not any Arabs from Palestine coming over here saying it is the so-called Negro, black, colored, African American, Hispanic, Latino, so-called minority in America who are calling themselves and identifying with their ancient ancestors as Moors. with a theocratic government. So again, we see here that he mentions, Rahm Emanuel mentioned the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples guaranteed in the Charter.